Continuing on with our framework, we started writing a simple framework that involves something about the company and profitability, external categories like the market, and then risks. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what kind of things go under each. You want to have under revenue, what makes up revenue? That could be price and quantity. It could also be things like product lines. Under costs, typical thing to write is something like variable costs and fixed costs. Those are the two types of costs. Under marketplace, you might want to think about areas that are external to the company. So that could be its customers, competition. Those are two good examples. Under risks, you might want to put a few things that are broad risks that apply to a lot of companies. Now, that could be things like reputation. It could be things like government risk. It's good to write some of these out because they're not so obvious like revenues and costs. Another thing is, I've seen a lot of people stop right here. This isn't enough for a framework. This should be really quick. These are kind of just the high-level categories that you might think about in a revenue or profit type problem. In this case, I need to be more specific and tailor my framework to this specific case. I didn't give you a lot of detail here, so it's a little bit difficult to see what exactly the context is around Unilever's profit problem. They might be saying that they entered a new country, they had some issues with a new competitor coming through. Those types of hints in the prompt here would help you figure out which of these buckets you should really expand upon. You want to have at least a couple of more branches on each of these. Especially under profit. Usually if you have the profit equation here, you really need to break out each of those. If you have things like government, you might only have one additional item. But safe to say that you should have a couple of branches for almost every single one. That is to say, you might have even more than that for a couple key ones. Let's say this case was really about competition. I might write competition, I might have new entrants, I might have existing rivals, and then I might even put out an idea, new entrants. Maybe I need to think about how many are there? What size? What categories? And I might not break out existing rivals since I didn't get a lot of context about that in the beginning. This is how you start to break out your framework into a little bit more specific areas you want to ask about. Also, let's say they said costs are rising as well. Then I might want to break out my costs a little bit more with some areas that I might want to ask about during the case interview. Usually after the framework, you're going to ask for some details around some of their product lines to get a little bit more information in order to answer the question about profitability. Here I might say about, cost per unit. I might think about labor hours. These are some types of costs that I probably want to ask about later in the case, and are really good to write down explicitly here in the framework.